Hi there, and welcome back to the third episode of the MakerPipe Masterclass. In this series, we're walking you through the process of building DIY projects with electrical conduit and MakerPipe connectors. In the second episode, we highlighted the different features of those materials and talked about how they combine together to make it easy to build awesome DIY projects like these. We also talked through the basic tools that you need for building. In this episode of the Masterclass, I'm going to show you the simple skills you need to use those tools and actually start building with conduit and connectors. Let's start with the process for cutting EMT conduit. Every good build starts with accurate measurements. I've got some 3/4 inch EMT conduit here, and our first step is to measure and mark where to cut it. Using a tape measure, I'll first measure the length of my cut and make a clear mark on the conduit with a marker. I recommend using a dry erase marker instead of a Sharpie for this because it's easy to wipe off if you accidentally mark the wrong spot. Another pro tip that first-time builders and even experienced builders overlook sometimes is to make sure to account for the connectors in your measurements. Some of them will add length to the conduit and cause your dimensions to be off if you're not careful. We have a separate video dedicated to creating cut lists that I'll link down below. For now, it's a small but important thing to keep in mind. It can make a big difference in getting your build to come out exactly how you intend. Alright, now that our conduit is marked, it's time to cut it. Don't worry if you've never cut metal pipes before. With the right tool, it's straightforward and doesn't take much to do it. Today I'm using the rotating, handheld pipe and tube cutter that we recommended in the last episode. This little tool is all you need to cut the conduit for your projects. To start, you simply position the cutting wheel exactly on the line that you just marked and tighten the knob until the cutter is firmly on the tubing. You want to be careful not to accidentally over-tighten the knob. You should be able to easily rotate the cutter without it binding or slipping off of the conduit. The key here is patience, and essentially you'll just tighten gradually and rotate the cutter around the conduit over and over. You can see how it scores the pipe and digs in a little bit more with each rotation. Repeat this process until you cut almost completely through the conduit. One trick that I learned from tradesmen is to stop just before the cut is completed and snap the conduit in two. This preserves your cutting wheel over time and increases the lifespan of the tool. You'll notice how smooth and quiet and clean the cutting process is. There's no loud saws, no sparks, no electricity, and no metal shavings flying all over the place. This is approachable for anyone, even if you're brand new to DIY projects or building things. Another trick I do pretty often is using a freshly cut piece of conduit as a measuring stick for other pieces that need to be the same length in my build. This is especially useful if you accidentally cut the first one a little short or too long and you don't want to waste any more conduit. Just line up the two pieces side by side and mark the measurement based on the cut you've already made. Some builders like to clamp their conduit down on a flat surface or to their build and then cut through the conduit once it's secure. This can make cutting EMT even easier and less straining on your hands. Now we have a freshly cut piece of conduit, but the job isn't quite done yet. The inside edge of the cut will be a bit sharp and have a burr from the cutting process. As mentioned in the last episode, there's a few options for removing burrs. My recommendation for most builds is the built-in deburring tool that you'll find on most handheld pipe and tube cutters. It gets the job done well. You simply insert the tool into the open end of the conduit and apply some pressure and rotate it around and around. You can see little metal shavings coming off as I do this. Now after a few seconds, the inside edge will be nice and smooth. Deburring is important for a couple of reasons. First, it removes sharp edges so you'll be less likely to cut your hands while handling the pipe. Secondly, it will make it much easier to use accessories like the threaded pipe inserts. This little tool is more than capable, but there are other options for deburring that work well. For more methods, check out the video that I've linked down in the description. By the end of this step, you've seen that cutting metal conduit and deburring it is very doable with basic tools. Now with a bit of patience, we've got a clean, precise cut exactly where we wanted, and it was safe and easy. No power tools or workshop needed. You can do this pretty much anywhere without making a mess. With our pieces of conduit cut to size, we're ready for the fun part, which is assembling the connectors and actually joining pipes together. This is where your project starts to take shape. I recommend that you lay out the connector pieces from your order before you start building with them. This helps a lot with the assembly of your project because you will have an inventory of your parts as well as a general idea of which pieces go together. You can refer to the connector pictures or video overviews on the website to know which pieces go together for the specific parts that you ordered. Something to keep in mind here is that we flat pack and seal pieces together, and some of them can be used by multiple different connectors in the MakerPipe system. Pay close attention to the pieces that make up the 90 and 180 degree connector as well as the 4 and 5-way connector. These are the most commonly confused in this regard. Sometimes when setting up to build, you might find it helpful to go a step further and loosely assemble your parts together. This can be helpful for the parts that are made up of a few different pieces and use several nuts and bolts. You can then just slide them in place when you need them in your project. Now whether you just lay your connectors out or loosely assemble them, you're ready to put your project together. In the last episode we put together a T connector. Let's put a couple of other connectors together and highlight a few things you should know and keep in mind when building. As mentioned in previous episodes, you won't have to do any drilling or welding or anything like that. You just need your 5mm hex wrench of choice. I'm going to use the simple L-shaped Allen key to show you how easy it is to make strong connections. Let's put together a 90-degree connector first. It's made up of these two pieces, and it joins 3 pieces of conduit together. You'll notice something important with the middle piece of conduit. As you can see, there is nothing stopping the conduit from running all the way through it. You'll see this type of clamp function across various connectors in the MakerPipe system. Essentially, this allows you to clamp the fittings just about anywhere along a piece of conduit, even flush with the end. Keeping this in mind will open up a lot of creative possibilities in your builds. With connections that have multiple pieces of conduit like the 90-degree connector, I recommend that you tighten the through pipe connection in place on your conduit before inserting the other pieces. You'll notice that all of the MakerPipe pieces have this recess and hole in them. This is where the bolt goes through and where the nut fits snugly during assembly. You can place the hardware on either side. One thing I'll recommend is to be mindful of where the bolts will be facing after the build is finished. This will keep you from accidentally hiding a bolt, which can make it difficult to adjust things after the build is finished and up against a wall, for example. You'll probably find it helpful to hold the nut in place at first until you get the bolt threaded a few times. Some builders even like to use a piece of electrical tape to hold the nut in place during this assembly. Tighten just enough to hold the connector in place while still allowing you to insert the 2 remaining pieces of conduit. And finish tightening the bolt with a hex wrench. You can see that the pocket holds the nut, so you don't need any other tools while you tighten the bolt on the opposite side. These 2 pieces form a different connection than the first one that we saw, because they stop inside of the connector instead of running continuously through it. These are the connections that you have to watch out for when planning out your cut list and measurements. This is because, as you can see, there is space between the end of the conduit and the outside of the connector. Just make sure to remember this when planning out your dimensions and measurements for your projects. Another trick that I find really handy is to put connectors in place and then measure between them to figure out what length the conduit needs to be. This is especially helpful if you're working with unusual dimensions. Sometimes I've even used a clamp to hold connectors loosely in place to make this even easier. This can save you a lot of time and makes it pretty easy to figure out the lengths that you need for cutting the conduit down to size. I use this trick the most when creating braces in my builds. Speaking of which, let's put together another connector and highlight something else important. This is the 45-degree connector, and it's most commonly used for bracing projects. One of the main design features of this connector, as well as a few others in the system, are the puzzle pieces that interlock together. It's important to be mindful of these and make sure they interface properly when assembling connections. Just like with the 90, we can use the nut and bolt to bring everything together and complete the connection. And just like that, we have another strong connection done and ready to go. One of the great things about MakerPipe connectors is how forgiving and adjustable the system is. If you realize that you placed this connector a bit off from where you wanted it, or if the angle isn't perfect, it's not a problem. You can just loosen the bolt a little and then adjust the conduit's position or rotation and then retighten it. You're never permanently locked in, unlike with welding or PVC glue. This is a clamp system, so you can always tweak or even completely disassemble and reuse the pieces. That gives new builders a lot of confidence to experiment, since mistakes are easy to fix. When assembling any project, big or small, a key to success is keeping everything aligned and square. One easy way that you can align your final projects is to wait until the end to fully tighten all the connectors in your build. Try to tighten them just enough so the pipes hold together but can still pivot if need be. This allows you to adjust angles and lengths slightly at each joint as needed to get everything lined up perfectly. Once everything is in place and looking good, then you can go back and tighten all the bolts fully. This method prevents you from accidentally locking in a misalignment. It's much easier to square up a frame when you have a little flexibility in the connections at first. Another huge help when aligning your connections is to build your project on a flat surface such as the ground or a table of some kind. This will make it much easier to build your frames and keep them aligned and square while doing so. A lot of times before I'll build a project, I'll think about the process based on how I can build on the ground or a flat surface because of how helpful it is. For example, let's say you're building a frame around your raised garden bed. It can be tempting to secure the vertical posts in the ground first and then attempt to build off of them. Instead, I'd recommend to build one side of the enclosure flat on the ground first and then join the walls together. You'll find that this makes it much easier to line things up correctly. One last tip I like to recommend for aligning things properly is to mark on the conduit where you plan to make connections. This goes a long way when building your project. It's good to make a mark that looks something like this, which allows you to see where the connectors go and to also see which side of the line they should be connected on so you don't accidentally place one side of your brace above the line and then the other side below it. We've covered a lot in this episode, so let's do a quick recap. We started with measuring and marking our conduit accurately. Remember to measure carefully and account for those connectors. Then we moved on to cutting the EMT conduit using a simple pipe cutter. You saw how easy it is to make a clean, precise cut and then deburr the conduit so it's safe and ready for accessories. After that, we assembled connectors onto the conduit, creating a solid joint with just a hex wrench and simple hardware. Remember to keep things a little loose until the very end for easy alignment and adjustments. All of these steps, measure, cut, deburr, connect, and align, are the foundational skills that you need to build your dream DIY project with MakerPipe connectors and EMT conduit. That's really the essence of this system. If you can do those basics, you can build just about anything from simple furniture to complex structures. It's very approachable and forgiving. It's also a lot of fun and is rewarding to take a pile of metal tubes and connectors and turn them into a sturdy structure. Now that we've got these building basics down, it's time to take the next step, which is planning and building a real project. In the next episode, I'm going to start planning and designing a build so that you can see what that process looks like. You'll see all kinds of different things like making a cut and parts list, as well as modeling out the build idea and more. If you've watched this far, you have the knowledge to measure and cut, conduit, and connect it confidently. These are the same steps in all MakerPipe builds, big and small, so you're already on your way to making awesome DIY structures. As always, if you have any questions about what we did today, maybe you're unsure about using the cutter or how tight is tight enough on a bolt, or anything at all, feel free to ask in the comments. We're here and happy to help. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the MakerPipe Masterclass. If you found this helpful, like the video and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next part of the series. Until then, happy building, and I'll see you in the next one.